who he allows in his pulpit, especially on Sunday mornings. And that makes it especially exciting for me that he would allow me to come and speak to you this morning about missions and faith promise and how God is using our faith promise dollars in Africa and Peru and around the world. I've asked the ushers to come, and gentlemen, if you'll come forward, I want to pass out the faith promise commitment and budget cards to you, and I want everybody to have one. And when you look at your card, you'll see on the budget side on the back, it's broken down into 3 categories: local, district, and general. And if there's one thing that this church is good about, is designated funds. When you give to something, that's where it goes. And this is where your faith promise dollars are broken down in. Everything in the local is spent at the local church, and then the district budget there, this money goes to help the missions program on the district level. And then the general expense goes to Kansas City. The biggest one there, and the most important one, is that World Evangelism Fund. The World Evangelism Fund, that pays the salaries and all of the expenses related to missionaries around the world, and that's what we call first dollars. Everything that comes in, that is paid first. Mel and Kendall do a good job of making sure that World Evangelism budget is paid up in full every week. And so that's the total expense, and our goal today is to underwrite that $49,476. On the other side is how you can give. And the amount is not near as important as the participation. We want you to participate, and the amount is certainly between you and the Lord. I want to read a scripture to you this morning as we get started. This is one of my life verses that the Lord gave me many, many years ago, and it's been the driving factor for me in missions ever since that I took my first trip to Barbados in 1987 under Pastor Henry Mills. In reading verses 16, 17, and 18. By this we know love, because he laid down his life for us, and we also are to lay down our lives for the brethren. But whoever has this world's goods and sees his brother in need and shuts up his heart from him, how does the love of God abide in him? Verse 18, my little children, let us not love in word or in tongue, but in deed and in truth. Now, I don't know about you, but when I read my devotions and I get into the scriptures, there's a lot of scriptures that I read that I may have to read 2 or 3 times to get the general gist of it. Or I might even have to go to the commentary to do some research on it. But folks, this gets it just as simple as it gets. You can't misinterpret that. If you look at that verse 17, but if I have this world's goods and I see my brother in need, and Charles Cummings shuts up his heart from him, how can the love of God abide in me? That's awesome. And he don't leave it right there. He goes on and puts the B on us a little bit more. In verse 18, let me not love in word or in tongue, but in deed and in truth. So that tells me I've got to get up off of my seat. I've got to do something about it, and I've got to implement God's word. And that's where Faith Promise has been for me for many, many years now. I haven't had the chance to share with you about missions in quite a while because of the pandemic, and I've missed sharing with you. And we've had this trip to Africa that I never did get to really talk to you about. But I want to share with you this morning about my trip to Africa, and then basically 2 trips to Peru, but I want to back up and add an old trip there. And so we're going to talk about Africa and Peru. Excuse me. We flew into Johannesburg, South Africa, and then we drove 3 hours south to Malane, where we built the Tonga Church of the Nazarene. Its building is about 25 by 30. It's a small building. We flew from here to Atlanta and caught a direct flight out of Atlanta down to Johannesburg. That's a 16-hour flight. Unbelievable. That was tough. But it was quite a trip when we got there. Before we leave this, and some of you geographically illiterates, when we talk about Peru, we're going to be over here on this western side of South America here in a few minutes. But when we arrive at a destination, we always try to go to the job site first to see what the condition it's in and get a game plan on how to go forward with it. This is how we found the building when we arrived. 5 years prior to this, the district had bought the land and put up the concrete blocks, and they ran out of money. Grass was 3 feet high in the sanctuary and on the outside, and here the locals were trying to clean it up for us. Our first project was to backfill the inside of the church. But before we could even get started, we had to go to the hardware store and buy 3 wheelbarrows because they only had one, and it wasn't working very well. And we had to find a concrete mixer because we knew we had to pour the floor, so we rented a concrete mixer. But here we're backfilling the sanctuary with about 10 to 12 inches of dirt and rock. Once we got it all spread out, we started pouring the concrete at the front of the sanctuary. And the only way that we had to level it, we could measure down from the top wall down and get a mark on each side, and you can't see it, but there's a line right there. And we could stretch lines across it in order to level back up to that line. But it really turned out quite well. Here we're getting back real close to the back of the sanctuary and right out of the front door. And we had a lot of help. That's one of the Nazarene pastors there dumping that. We had a lot of help every morning from the local congregation and different pastors around the district, and it was just awesome. Another thing that we had to do early on, there was no sign. People did not know what the building was. So we went down to a local sign shop and had them make us a sign so we could put it up so the neighbors would know who we were. We went and bought some lumber and built them some benches. Out of that leftover lumber, we built a pulpit, and here the roof is on, and it's beginning to come together. This is the congregation. This gentleman, this is Bill Beam right here. The guys on his left and right are some local guys that the district had hired. They put on the roof while we were pouring the concrete, and you can see over here is the frames that they were welding together for the windows. One thing that we always try to do is to make sure that we leave enough money for them to build the church and finish it out after we're gone. And they did, and they finished the church, and the congregation is alive and well. One of the things that we always do on Work and Witness trip, we always take a weekend or 2 off and take advantage of the tourist attractions and whatever it is around that part of the world. And this trip to South Africa has been on my bucket list for many, many years because this is the birthplace of Nazarene missions. And I've always wanted to go there to Swaziland, or Eswatini now, and the Raleigh-Pitkin Memorial Hospital, and it's just something I've always wanted to do. And when you have the privilege of setting the destination and working up the trips, you can do things like that. You know, it works out. It works out just fine. But our first weekend, we went to Pigs Peak, Swaziland. That's the actual name of it, Pigs Peak. There's got to be an interesting story behind that. Harmon and Lula Smelzenbach Started the work in Swaziland in 1907. Harmon passed away in 1929, and the Smelzenbaugh family has been serving the Church of the Nazarene in South Africa ever since. And there's a young couple over there now. Their names is Brian and Missy Smelzenbaugh. Marilyn and I have gotten to know them over the years, and Brian is the great-grandson of Harmon, and they're currently serving in South Africa. This is the first church that was built in South Africa, in Swaziland, in the Church of the Nazarene, way back in 1907. It's currently being used as a children's daycare facility during the day and Sunday. Behind that building is the cemetery where all the Smelzenbaugh families are buried there. And it was just an awesome day to look at that. There's a huge Church of the Nazarene there on that facility right now. And it was just good to drive in there and see that and see where Harmon and Lula Smelzenbaugh started their missionary journey many, many years ago. The Raleigh-Fickin Memorial Hospital, went on there on the next weekend. The hospital was started by the Church of the Nazarene in 1925, but not too many years ago, the hospital got so big that they turned it over to the government, and they took it over. But the church was smart enough to maintain enough seats on the governing board to be a part of the mission of the church and to have that governing role there. And the hospital also operates many clinics all over Swaziland that feeds it, and they're responsible for training it. And it was awesome. We were able to go in there. I wasn't able to get a good shot of the hospital, but it's a major complex there. There's an older Church of the Nazarene there. They turned it into a museum about their church now, but there is a big, huge Church of the Nazarene there on the grounds. This is the director of the hospital, and we were able to get with him and get a tour set up, and he's explaining the history of the church and when it was built in 1925, and he gave us a walking tour through the hospital. Their hospital there is a little bit different. If you're in that hospital, some family member has to be with you to help you and feed you and take care of you and everything. So it's a really whole lot different environment than what we're used to. But it was good to be there. We want to move over to Peru. Well, let's go to Kruger National Park. The next weekend, we went over to Kruger National Park. There, we arrived at the park late one afternoon and we stayed in cabins, 2 people to a cabin there in the park. But we loaded the bus and we got a night tour of the park to watch the animals. You wouldn't think you would see that many at night, but you do. And the next morning after breakfast, we went back and spent most of the day in the park, just driving around and looking at all of the animals in their natural environment. And I only have a couple of pictures here, but all of these were up close and personal. And every kind of animal that you can imagine that's in the zoo, we got to see it that day in their natural environment. And I could spend the next 20 minutes showing you pictures of all of the animals, but we better not. Because Pastor told me that he usually has around 30 slides or so to do his sermon in 30 minutes. Well, that's about a minute a slide, and I've got 87 slides, so you guys might be in trouble this morning, so we'll just have to see how that works out. But that was our trip to Africa. And one of the good things about it, and I've shared this with you guys before, that church had been praying for 5 years for somebody to come help them finish their church. All at the same time, we were on this side of the pond praying for God's direction on where do you want us to go? Where do you want us to build? And when, through work and witness, when you can become the answer to somebody else's prayer across the pond, that's just pretty awesome. That is awesome. And it's just so exciting. Those people were so excited and they were there. It's just amazing when you know you're doing what God wants you to do. In 1997, we took our first trip to the New Horizon mission station up in the northern part of Peru. We flew into, we flew into Lima, where we changed planes over to a local flight, and we flew up to northern part of Peru. And on arrival there, we loaded a bus that the missionary had provided for us for an 8-hour drive in a bus over mostly dirt roads. You start out on the western side of Peru, and it's a dry, arid climate. And the more you go up and over the mountains, you drop down into the jungle on the other side and arriving at the mission station. Here, we will build 2 churches on this one trip. The first is a men's only deal because it's so far and so hard to get back into it, and there was no sleeping provisions or anything like that for the ladies, so they couldn't go on this first trip. But we built another one where we could drive down in just a short hike back into the jungle, where the ladies were able to help us with that next one. But here, this is the gate to the New Horizon mission station. Here is a clinic. Dr. Garman, we'll meet him here in a minute. He is a medical doctor, and this was his clinic. There's a Bible college there on the ground, and that's where Larry and Addie live. And they carved this mission station out of the raw jungle, and they had been missionaries there before they retired for 50 years. This is where they raised their family. But something happened to me in that gate right there, and it's the first time it's ever happened to me on the mission field. When I drove through the gate, you could feel the presence of God like I've never felt it before. It's only happened to me one other time when we picked out a site in Cuba for our trips there. But I felt like a lot like Moses being on hollow, on sacred ground. And we need those confirmations along when we're doing things for the Lord, that we're in the right place at the right time. And God came and blessed, but you could feel the presence in this place. You go on back through the back of the grounds. Here's Larry and Addie's house. It's way in the back, and most of the students came out to see us and welcome us and give us greetings. And this is Larry and Addie Garman. Addie passed away about the same time that Marilyn did, and over the years since this trip, Larry and Addie and Marilyn and I had developed a good friendship over the years, and we've been in their house many times. And that friendship will pay off in a couple of trips down the road. But they are just special God's people, and Larry and I still communicate on a regular basis. I'm sorry. That's the church there that serves the Bible college, and everybody on the grounds. A real nice facility. This is interesting here. You'll get a kick out of this one. And this is where we took our showers. This stream right there runs pretty consistently, and there's that PVC pipe right there is about 100 feet long, and it lays in the bed of the stream. And they tied it to this stick going across there, and you can't tell it, but there's a little hole right there. And that stream of water is pretty consistent pressure. But there's one thing about it, it's cold. And the only thing you could do, now, the men took their showers first. There was a 2-hour period of an afternoon when the men took their showers and the ladies took theirs 2 hours later. And so we were there taking our showers. And the only thing you could do was just suck it up and get a big, deep breath, and step into that cold thing. Just get out as quick as you can. And I've had cold showers before, but never since that. So it was quite a challenge. So if the showers wasn't quite up to par, the bathrooms were about the same. There's the men's on one side and the ladies on the other side, down behind Larry and Eddie's house. The mission station is up on a hill overlooking the Amazon River. The church that we built in this trip we just canceled, I'll get it out in a minute, is on the far side of this river. It's over here on this side of the river. It's where our next one is going to be. Here the men, we walk down to the river, and we have to get all of our luggage, all of our tools in 2 different boats, and we head out down the river. We go down river, and we go up one of the tributaries until we run out of water. And we walk out and we pick up all of our luggage, and some of the local people were there to help us, thank the Lord. But we hiked back in the jungle. It was around 1.5 miles. It seemed like a whole lot further than that, toting our luggage and everything back into the jungle. And when we got there, this is what we found. They had laid out the building for us in the corners. They had been back in the jungle with their chainsaws and cut chainsaw lumber for us. And this is the first time we'd ever built a building out of wood. They're all usually concrete. But it took us a few days, but it began to come together. Back here is the building where we slept. We slept on bamboo slats and under mosquito bars. And that's where we had our meals right there. They cooked our meals every day, and it was usually yuca rice over cooked in a sauce or someplace, but there was only one scrawny chicken for all of us, so most of the time you didn't get any meat. It was just the broth off of it. But we made it just fine. But the bad thing about it is all of the wood and the metal that's in that building went to this building. So that the further we got into the process of building this one, the more open that one became, So it was, unique, okay? Here, Dr. Larry Garman designed those 3 crosses there, and he put those on every church that he built in Peru. And here we're hanging the Church of the Nazarene sign. Turned out to be a beautiful facility. This is the congregation. This is the pastor over here. And they were just so excited to have a place to worship. When you go to Peru, the big thing that you do in Peru is go down to southern Peru and see the Inca ruins in Machu Picchu. And so we did that the last weekend that we were there in Peru. But to get to Machu Picchu, we had to go back over the mountain, fly to Lima, change planes again, catch another flight all the way down to Cusco, Peru. We checked into the hotel, and early the next morning, we caught a small gauge railroad to the bottom of the mountain. This is the top of the mountain of Machu Picchu and all of the Inca ruins. You can tell that the mountains and how high we are here. It's just really an awesome trip that we had, and it's a once-in-a-lifetime experience to go to a place like this, and it was really awesome. But when we caught the train comes up to here, and then you load the bus. He crosses the river, and this is the road going up the side of the mountain. And there's a bus right there that takes you up. Just getting to the top of the mountain was a pretty awesome trip just on its own. And we did have a tour guide that we had hired to help us and explain everything to us, and it was just an awesome day. And after that, we just we went back home. And that was the end of a tremendous, the facilities are not as bad as that anymore. We stay in some pretty nice hotels now. But that was an interesting trip. But it started us on a journey. Of all my trips, this is my special place. I love Peru, and I love the people and what God has done there for us. But let's go to Cachi, Peru in 2015. Let me give you the background of this before I show you the building. Betty and Franklin Saree were members of this church for many, many years. Betty was our missionary president for many years. Betty was responsible for our Alabaster birthday bash, and for 22 years now, and we've raised right at $100,000 because of her faithfulness to missions and her vision. And Franklin was a board member, and Franklin was one of those kind, if you wanted anything to be fixed or repaired or replaced in the church, you called Franklin. But Franklin passed away in 2005, and Betty passed away in 2012. But this couple had made provisions in their will to leave a portion of their estate to the church, and they earmarked it for missions. Once the estate was settled, Diana Saree Macklin, who was one of Betty's daughters, brought a check by the church and left it for a little over $15,000. When Mel told me about the check, and I was missionary president then, and when Mel told me about the check, I began to pray, Lord, how do you want me to spend this? What do I apply this to? And after several weeks of prayer, the Lord opened up to me that we need to build a church in their honor on the mission field. So the first thing I did was went to the family, went to Gail and Nora and Diana, and asked them if it would be okay, what they thought about it, and they were very excited about it. And so the next thing, I began to pray about where, and I went to my friend Larry Garman. And I called Larry. I said, Larry, I've got $15,000 and I want to build a church in Peru and dedicate it to Betty and Franklin Saree. Can you help me? He said, I sure can. In a couple of weeks, he came back. He came back with 3 locations because he's used to every mission team that comes to Peru, they want to go to the southern half of the Peru so they can go to Machu Picchu. He came back with 3 locations. 2 of them were in the south and 1 of them was in the north. He said, Charles, just take your pick. I said, no, Larry, it's not going to work that way. I said, I want to go where God wants me to go, and I want to go where the greatest need is. And he said, well, the greatest need is in Tecachi, way up in the northern part. And so that's where we went. It usually takes about a year to put one of these trips together. And so we went to Tecachi. Now, when you go on a mission trip, you have to send your money down 90 days early before you get there. It takes forever for the money to get there, but the main thing is so that the locals will have a chance to dig and pour the footings and get it started up. And so this is how we found the building. When we arrived, they had the concrete blocks poured in the building. Wrong button. Well, it's supposed to be going backwards. There you go. I'm sorry. The blocks are laid to the top of the windows. But let me deviate from my notes for just a minute. This gentleman right there. You can't tell, but hair and a ponytail with lots of tattoos. His name is Chris, and he's the son of a pastor raised in the mission field. He had gotten away for the Lord for a lot of years in his younger life, but he had just found the Lord right prior to this, and he was getting his feet down and coming back to the Lord. And it's another story, but another miracle of how he even made the team in the first place. But he turned out to be such a blessing. He was a magnet to kids and young people. He was a witness for 2 weeks for the Lord. Because within just a few weeks on our return back to Little Rock, he got killed in an automobile accident. And with a young family at home. And I've thought about that many times, and how God worked it out that he's even on the trip in the first place, and to be a part of that. Because this trip, not only did he have a big effect on everybody else, but he had an effect on a lot of the young people there in Tecachi. And he's just a special, special young man. But I've told people many, many times that come to me and want to talk about missions, and Charles, I want to go on a work and witness trip, and this and that. And I tell them, I ask them, I said, are you happy with your life and your relationship with the Lord? And I said, okay, if you are, you do not want to go on a mission trip. You need to stay at home. Because mission will change your life. You will come back a different person. So here is the church itself. It's a pretty good sized church. This is on there's a little water tower they put up in the back to serve the restrooms. That is the front door, and this is the platform here. And again, the blocks are poured or laid to the top of the windows. All of our concrete, no concrete machines here. We had to mix everything on the ground. Another little side note, you see this motorcycle. It's a 3-wheel motorcycle with a seat in the back. You can seat 3 adults on it. The pastor lived way out in the country, and he didn't have a way to get back and forth to church. We took a collection just amongst the team members, and we raised $3,000, and we bought the pastor one of those motorcycles so that he could get around in, and we gave it to him before we left. This is the bond beam. Usually it's the last thing that goes up across the top, but here they wanted to use it as the headers over their windows. So you form it up, you put concrete in it, and then you begin to pour it. The only way we had to pour it is just to 5 gallons at a time. And here the bond beam is completed around the sanctuary, and this is where we went back and laid 4 more courses of concrete block on top of it to get the height. Now, most of you recognize this young man. This is Pastor Luke. He was our youth pastor for a long time, and I put this one in there, I just had to. One of the delicacies in Peru at this part is fried, they called it something else, but in South Arkansas it's grub worms, that's all it was, fried grub worms. And Pastor Luke was the only one that had enough nerve to try it, and nobody else, but Pastor Luke. So I hope he gets a chance to see that. That's pretty awesome. On the roof, normally your roof trusses go from side to side. In this building, they go from corner to opposite corner. This right here, the guy building the trusses built this, and it's about 1 foot square. You made out of rebar, and you can't tell it, but it's got cables we strung to the outside of the church to hold it up. So everybody gathered on this thing. He was putting it up in the back. We came out across the street, went in the front door, all the way through the window in the back so we could get the front in the building, and then put it back out of the window and put it up. He had a come along up here that he tied on this, and he began to just pull it up 10 feet at a time, tie it off, and redo it and keep on until he got it up to where it belonged, corner to corner. Then they welded it on that corner and then welded it on the other corner, and then they began to put the frames together. Our district superintendent was able to come by one evening, and so this is where we had our dedication service to Betty and Franklin, and had a good time. And there's the picture that we're leaving with them. And this is Gail Saree there. And this is the pastor and his wife, and Gail Saree and Nora Saree, 2 of Betty's daughters, and then Dr. Garman. Here you can tell the frame of the window of the ceiling beginning to come together just a little bit, and they welded it up one at a time. There, the part of the metal is going up. And it's an awesome building, and no post at all in around the sanctuary. The building is just quite beautiful. Of course, we were not there when they finished this. They did all of the plaster themselves, plaster over the concrete blocks and painted it. inside and out, and the front doors. It is an awesome church. And just inside the front door on the left wall is this picture of Betty and Franklin. And the plaque talks about in memory of Franklin and Betty Sorry, the South Arkansas District, Brockington Road, Church of the Nazarene, Sherwood, Arkansas. Pretty awesome. This picture was taken a year later, and it's packed out. People, you can't tell, but there's people standing outside in the door that can't get in. And what really bothers me and moves me, and it just excites me to no end, that all of these people are worshiping God and developing a relationship with Him, and people are being won to the Lord because of the obedience of one couple. One couple was obedient and did what God told them to do. And that church, not just that church, but it has reflected, it has turned into be the community meeting place for all of the churches. And God has touched so many lives, all because of obedience of one couple. And I can't help but think that God is whispering in somebody's ear this evening that you need to consider that, of altering your will and taking care of some of that. If God is whispering that in your ear, I want you to see Mel says, and he'll be happy to answer any questions that you might have about that. And just be obedient to how God leads you. We come down to, we were scheduled to go back to the New Horizon mission station to build that church on the far side of the river I showed you in 21 and 22. And so we started back in early 20 putting the trip together, and we got it all put together, and it was coming together very, very nicely, and I had a good team put together. And all of a sudden the pandemic hit, and you always have to register a team with Kansas City once you get it set up with the district superintendent and the local work and witness coordinator, and we had already done that. But they came back to us and said, okay, you have to get permission from Kansas City, the regional director, the district superintendent, and the local work and witness guy. We had to get permission from 4 people to go to Peru. We had Kansas City, they were okay. I had the local guy. The district superintendent signed off on it, but the regional director said, no, you can't come. So we had to cancel it. And so we met with the team and we agreed, okay, let's put it off a year and everything ought to be okay by then. But we didn't know it going through all of this. God had a plan that He was working to get the church built, even though it looked like we wasn't going to be able to go. So we canceled it. I rolled over everything, changed the date, and got it all approved for February the 11th of 22. We come down to October, and it's time to send our project money down. The project money for this trip is $10,000, and it came out of Work and Witness. Came out of Faith Promise, I'm sorry. Your Faith Promise dollars, and it's on the line item where we save money for project funds. We sent in our $10,000 in October, and we're getting excited. It looks like it's going to work, and we get down right before it's time to depart, and we find out, if you remember, we've had to get a COVID test here in Little Rock before we left within 72 hours. And then in Lima, we have to get another test within 72 hours in Lima. The test in Little Rock is pretty inexpensive, wasn't no big deal. But the test in Lima was $150 per person, which really jacked up our cost. But then we were told if one of the team members come down with it, there's a good possibility that the whole team would have to stay in quarantine for 14 days. So I met with our team and explained it to them, and the havoc that would cause if somebody's job, if they had to stay, and the tremendous cost, and we didn't have the money to do that for 14 days. So the team made the decision that we just needed to cancel it for the second time. After I sent an email to Kansas City and the regional director and the district superintendent and the local working witness guy, telling them that we were going to have to cancel. A couple of days later, I got an email back from the district superintendent, and he said, "Mr. Cummings, I'm sorry that you're not going to be able to come. But," he said, "I'll tell you what I'll do. I will save your $10,000 until you get here and build the church." And the Lord began to talk to me about that. And folks, I just couldn't get comfortable with that. Because they don't need us to build that church. They're very capable. And so I emailed him back. I said, "No, that's not right. You take that $10,000 and build your church." And so they started working on it. Here they are, they're clearing their land, getting rid of all of the trees and gathering up the rocks. At this point in time, we were in the dry season, so the river was down, real low. So they have to go down to the river and gather up all of the rock out of the river and come up. And this is after they have screened it with the... I'm always hitting that wrong button. Here is after they have screened the rock. This rock where they'll put in the concrete, and that goes in the mortar mix over there. And then they've gathered up their rebar right there. They make their own concrete blocks right there on the job site. The bigger rocks, what they do with those, when they dig their footings, they'll put them in the bottom of the footing. It makes the footings a little stronger, and it takes less concrete that way, and it just saves them some money. And they're still clearing the wood there. Here they're digging their footings and get ready to come up with it. This is where they finished it. This is Dr. Garman with the pastor and some of the people. The church it's a new start, and they're running 80 in attendance. And within just a few weeks ago, I got an email from Dr. Garman that they had just baptized 56 people. This is what the building looks like at that point now. They're through with the concrete. They plastered the walls. They went into the jungle with their chainsaw and cut their wood for the trusses and got it all looking good. And then they'll put the paint up on it. And this is what when Dr. Larry sent this to me, I called him and I said, "Larry, do they have enough money to finish the church for the doors and the windows?" He said, "No, Charles, they're out of money." I said, "Call them and find out how much they need to finish the church." And a couple of weeks later, he called me back and he said, "Charles, they need $2,500. I said, "I'll raise it." I remembered that Sue Baldwin had just passed away a few months before that, and I knew that some of her family had given funds designated for missions. So I went to Don and I said, "Don, this is where we're at. We need $2,500 to finish the building. Can you help me?" He said, "Yeah, I got it." So we got with Mel and they gave me a check for $2,500, and the timing Dr. Garman was going down the next week. And he cashed the check here in the United States and took $2,500 down and gave it to the pastor. And the church is finished. I don't have a picture of it yet, but the church is finished. We were not able to go, but the church got built. 56 people have been baptized. But through it all, you know, God doesn't do anything halfway. I was able to refund all the team members' money that they had paid in, a little over $3,000 apiece. The $10,000 I took out of Faith Promise to send down there to Charlotte. People had donated enough money. There's a lot of people in this church that when I go on a mission trip, they'll come up and just, you know, here, take this money and put it on the church, or take this. Can I help? Give me this. Through the donations of obedient people, I was able to replace that $10,000 in the church account. And it's back. Normally, we had paid over $4,000 deposit on our plane tickets. Normally, you don't get that kind of stuff back. They keep it. I was able to get all of it back, but $1,500. That's in the account. And so we come up and we got the church built. And again, 56 people have been saved and dedicated to the Lord. I want to leave you with this. Thanks to your support for world missions and your obedience to Faith Promise Giving, since 1997, BRCN and the South Arkansas District Working Witness teams, we've been to 5 different countries, and we have built 7 churches. And you say that real quick, and but when you stop and think about it, through the obedience of God's people and your giving, that district budget funds, a lot of that goes into work and witness. Through the obedience of God's people in your giving, there are 7 congregations that's worshiping God, and people are being won to the Lord because of those 7 churches that we've built. It's been an awesome journey. And I know I've crammed a whole lot into a short period of time. But I appreciate the opportunity to come and share with you. And we just covet your prayers in the days ahead. Thank you, Pastor.